Okay, everybody, welcome to a special edition of the From the Earth to the Moon podcast. I'm Doug. My co-host, as always, is Peter. Welcome, Peter.
Welcome, Doug. Welcome back, I should
Seriously,
say.
yeah. It's been so long since we've podcasted. There's been 2 more moon landings since we were last. Jesus.
Hardly.
Joe Angle finally got a shot. So we wanted to do sort of like a special, just a quickie podcast, just to sort of announce and celebrate that Peter and I have published a book based on this podcast. And we think it's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, most podcasts that could potentially become a book don't, and we actually put in the time and the work and the hours to put a book out for you guys, and 2, to sort of tell you about the book because it's different. Like it's really not like all the other Apollo books out there. And believe you me, we have read them all. So our goal in the book project was not to just do a straight Apollo history as everybody else did and sort of take our unique view of the Apollo program through the lens of the From the Earth to the Moon miniseries and create something novel and different.
Right. And there's also a great interview that Doug did with Andrew Chaikin, who, as everybody knows, wrote The Man on the Moon, which served as the basis for the miniseries From the Earth to the Moon. And we'll talk about that for a few minutes as well.
So, and the other thing too, I will point out is, some podcasts have become books. We're not the first person to do that, but usually it's just a straight transcript. They essentially, download the podcast, run it through a software algorithm, and reprint essentially a cleaned up version of the transcript. And we didn't do that, even though we could have, and it would have been fine. We rewrote every single episode from stem to stern. Completely reformatted it, restructured it as prose. And we added a lot more material, like we were working hard to keep the episodes at a good length so that people wouldn't get overloaded during the podcast. But in the format of the book, we were a little free to explore more topics, go into more detail on some things, and go in some directions that we didn't have time for in the show. So we don't want you to think that it's just a rehash of the podcast. There's also a lot of new material, and there's a lot of humor too. Like I'm actually really like the fact that, our sort of brand of humor, that we've gotten some comments that you guys like. So that's good. Our brand of humor kind of shines through. So like like I said, we've really tried hard to give you both a history of the miniseries, a history of the show, but also sort of keep it in our sort of special vein.
Right. I mean, I hate reading transcripts, especially really long ones. And even if we edit it down, I just think it's far less readable that way. Whereas the way we did it, it's prose. It's basically a discussion about the Apollo series, about the Apollo program. And the only transcript bits are tiny sections where we sort of do an aside about something, or we left it in because of context, or in our discussion where there are tiny bits. And it's also they're illustrated with photos from
right.
Paul and Gemini.
So the photos are an interesting story too. So we, everybody who's interested in Apollo and the manned spacecraft program knows that lots of photos get used over and over and over again. You can almost sort of tell, like, if a newspaper article is going to be written about a particular mission, which photo or photos they're going to use. And with the exception of 1 or 2 iconic photos that we just didn't feel like we could leave out, for example, the Earthrise photo, or the iconic image of Buzz Aldrin on the moon, where Neil is reflected in his visor. The rest of the photos, we actually purposely chose images that you probably, for the most part, haven't seen. I've literally looked at tens of thousands of Apollo photographs in my adult life. And I sort of, as I was picking the photos with Peter, we just wanted to get stuff that was different, or maybe showed things that you had seen from a different angle or a different perspective. Just, we didn't want it to be the same 10 photos that you'd seen in every other Apollo book. So
I like
Although I did
the
notice that there's another Apollo book with the same photo as ours on the cover.
can't win them all.
It's not actually the exact same photo. It's got to be taken within a few seconds of the
Yeah, it's
photo
one of
that's on our
those
cover. It's not exactly the
multi
same, but it's
frames.
when I first saw it after our book went up on Amazon, I briefly went into atrial fibrillation until I realized it wasn't exactly the same. But that having been said, most of the photos I can guarantee that you probably haven't seen before. So
Not too many people have a photo of Rusty Schweiker doing an EVA.
not even Rusty Schweiker. It brings back too many bad memories of him getting space sick for him. So let me just tell you the story of the Andy Chaikin interview. So I had corresponded with Andy a couple of years ago when he had published his book about Mars, and I had really enjoyed that and reached out to him, and we had an email exchange based on that. And then I reached out to Andy a few months ago and basically told him about this project, what it was, and that we were interested in interviewing him really about sort of how the miniseries came to be and what his role in it was. And, you could tell that he was eager to talk about this. I get the sense that, he makes his living writing and speaking about the space program, but I don't know if he's been asked to talk about From the Earth to the Moon in a long time. I mean, it's 20 years old now. And he initially said he had about 10 or 15 minutes, but he actually turned out to be extremely generous with his time. And I was able to interview him for over an hour. In the interview, I don't want to give too much away, no spoilers, but in the interview, he really tells a tremendous amount of detail about how the miniseries came to be, his interactions with Tom Hanks, how this went from really an idea that Tom Hanks had to a very, very fleshed out roadmap for a 12-episode miniseries to tell the entire story of Apollo, his role, his involvement, his visits to the sets, how he got to do a cameo. I mean, Peter and I know everything about this miniseries, and he had a lot of stories to tell that I had never heard. So it was really, really, truly novel and original information. And he was a lot of fun to talk to, and we really appreciate that he took the time to do it with us.
Yeah, I love the way he describes kind of like getting to the Tom Hanks kind of slipped him the scripts to read under the table because he wasn't officially actually involved in editing the show's scripts in any way. Because it crossed from, he was a consultant, right? He was not a SAG or a Screenwriters Guild member. And so it wasn't in his capacity really to do that, but he, was able to kind of look at stuff on under the table, so to speak.
Yeah, and then he wasn't a member of the Screenwriters Guild, so there were certain things he could do, and there were certain things that he couldn't do. But he was allowed to make meaningful input, and he actually was able to get certain things into some of the episodes that they didn't want to do. And for example, one of the things he goes into at length in the interview is that they didn't want to do as much emphasis on geology. And as you guys know from the podcast, that the geology. There's a whole episode about geology, but it plays out in a bunch of other episodes as well. And they were not interested in that content. And he had to put his foot down and say, here's why you have to have meaningful content about geology, because it was a huge part of their training and a huge part of the missions and what they were there to do. So the interview
Plus, it's super cool and chicks dig it.
Lee Silver was a real heartthrob.
Yeah, you guys actually talk about chicks not digging it in the interview.
What was I going to say? Yeah, the interview is actually in the beginning of the book. So we put the interview right at the beginning up front before we go into the episodes. There's also additional material in the book, by the way, about the opening credits sequence and how that's put together, as well as the Tom Hanks monologues, which we didn't really cover in the podcast. So everything is all in the book, and here's our shameless plug. It's only $6.99, so we priced it to sell, so it's not an exorbitant price. So we sort of very carefully thought about the price, and actually Amazon told me I could charge. They have this little algorithm in Amazon when you publish a book. And they actually told me I could sell it for more. They actually told me I thought I could sell it for significantly more, but we wanted to price it so that it was really within reach of anybody. So it's only $6.99. And it's on Amazon, and it's on all of the ebook formats, Nook, iBooks, everything. It's on. I think we've uploaded it to every single ebook platform. So whatever you have, whatever your ebook reader is, it's there.
Yeah, and Amazon knows everything. Like their algorithms know everything, so they should know what you should price something at. Like, they started sending me saw palmetto for my prostate. It just showed up one day, like read the mailbox. And I was like, that's interesting because I have actually started to have to get up at night. And there it was. They know everything.
That's good. That was a really good joke. The worst part is you're not joking.
Yeah, I know. I had to click on buy it now.
I'm trying to think what Amazon would send me if maybe I shouldn't say. Anyway. So the book has a slightly different title than the podcast. The book is called From the Earth to the Moon, the Miniseries Companion. So it's just a little bit different, but you can find it very, very easily. You can search basically under any of the sort of moon terms and you'll come up with it. But the official title is From the Earth to the Moon, the Miniseries Companion. We'll be looking forward to covering Apollos 18 and 19 as soon as we get around to it. Joe Angle has graciously agreed to give us an interview about waiting 50 years to get his Apollo flight, and we want to hear that story.
Yep.
All right, I think that should cover it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, and thanks again for listening, and enjoy the book.
Yeah, we were really, really pleased with the listenership. Peter and I have done a bunch of podcasts and they've all been successful, but this has by far and away been the most successful thing we've done, probably because we had the most passion about it and sort of, I guess, the longest ramp up in the sense that we've been thinking about these topics since we were little kids. So everything, we didn't leave it. Everything's on the page. Let's put it that way. All right. Should we wrap there?
Yep.
See you next time, everybody.